we came with her to the US illegal. I remember crossing the border by myself with two men that I didn't even know, watching my mother go with my two brothers. And that moment imprinted something within me that it was just such a moment. I mean, I was 5 years old watching these men cut my hair to make me look like a little boy and then going across the border. I eventually met my mother and my brothers, and we were in the US for a couple of years. And then my mother chose that she wanted to leave to Mexico once again. And at the time, I had a great uncle and a great aunt who never had children, and they wanted to raise me and give me a better life. You see your mother leaving and you question, you can't comprehend in that moment what is going on.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Flip That Shit. My name is Stacey Uhrig. I'm your host, and today's guest is Amparo Rojas, and you're going to love this interview. So Amparo's story is really interesting. I'm going to tell you what she shared with me, but we're going to really explore it. So Amparo was raised in a really chaotic household with a lot of trauma to move through. She had very little healthy guidance on what true love or even a healthy environment looked like. And that led her to enter toxic and unhealthy relationships and friendships throughout her life. So for the first 28 years, she was living this very unconscious, unaware trauma. And until she had her spiritual awakening, she didn't even understand what she was going through. She used modalities like Reiki and plant medicine, crystals, therapy, quantum healing, which I love, by the way. And that's how she found her true calling as a coach. And I've shared this with you guys before. Most coaches, especially in this space, they don't just decide to be a coach one day. They'll have likely had some sort of profound experience that gave them so much post-traumatic wisdom and growth that they don't want to keep it to themselves. So with that, welcome, Amparo.
Thank you so much. It really is an absolute honor to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. So listen, I know a little bit of your backstory, but let's just share it with the audience. You shared that you were raised in this really chaotic household with a lot of trauma to move through. Paint us a picture. What did that look like for you?
You sharing about my story, it did something to my heart right there, because I feel like that story is so far away from who I am now, but it was the beginning, right? The moments of the moments I had to endure and live. Are now on this side, I see them as true gifts. And as a child, I grew up in an environment where my mom was living in a very scarce situation with three of my brothers and sister and myself. So one, she was a single mother raising four children. I remember she had to leave to go to work, and I was 5 years old, caretaking for, at the time, my two brothers. And I mean, I was a 5-year-old child taking care of my two brothers. Eventually, she decided that she wanted to leave Mexico, come to the US to support, her children. And she did. We came with her to the US illegal. I remember crossing the border by myself with two men that I didn't even know, watching my mother go with my two brothers. And that moment imprinted something within me that it was just such a moment. I mean, I was 5 years old watching these men cut my hair to make me look like a little boy and then going across the border. I eventually met my mother and my brothers, and we were in the US for a couple of years. And then my mother chose that she wanted to leave to Mexico once again. And at the time, I had a great uncle and a great aunt who never had children, and they wanted to raise me and give me a better life. So in that moment, my mother made the decision to leave me with my uncle and my aunt. And, I grew up with this big resentment of how could you possibly leave me? But now who I am, I've come to realize that parents, mothers, and fathers, in the moment of those big decisions, because I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision for her, everything that they do in life is really, truly because of love. So when I had this spiritual awakening, I came to the realization that everything she did for us was truly coming from love. It was a moment where I was like, I don't need to go to therapy for all of this anymore. Like, I am in so much devotion and gratitude to her for that decision. So that was a little bit of my upbringing. I was in the US, raised by my aunt and uncle. They were in their late 60s. I went to a school where it was a private Catholic school. I was the only Spanish-speaking girl. I didn't know English, was bullied for that, especially in a private Catholic school. So there was a lot that I had to move through. And then I eventually ended up going to Mexico because I was illegal. So I had to go back to Mexico. I was there in the most pivotal years of my life, high school, beginning of college. So I came from a Catholic, wealthy upbringing into Mexico where there was so much poverty. And it was like I was a part of these two worlds. And there was so much confliction of I had a home, I had a safe bed, I had people who picked me up from school, took me home. I had food on the table every single day. And then I went back to Mexico where it was a struggle. It was a struggle to stay afloat. So that was a little bit of my experience with that deep wound of the feminine essence where I gave myself to relationships. And through those relationships, there was a lot of sexual abuse, a lot of physical abuse, emotional abuse. So that story, like I said, seems so long ago, but it was what I came here. My soul embarked on that journey.
Absolutely. And that's something we're going to talk about. I want people to gather some understanding here. So I have a couple of questions just to pull out the story. And then I want to get into this journey that you went on to, the spiritual awakening. So, gosh, so you just unpacked so much. So you're being raised by a single mom in Mexico. You were the oldest of the three?
Yes.
Okay. And first and foremost, I want people to understand a big part of the podcast is just education, right? So when people hear the word trauma, they think it has to be what I call the 3 A's: acts of violence, aggression, abuse. Being put in charge of 2 other children at the age of 5 can be very traumatic, because it's really allowing and leaving that 5-year-old in a level of responsibility that they know is too much. So now you're infusing into your system this fear of, I don't know what I'm doing. And what if I make a mistake? And would I get in trouble? And can I keep them safe? I don't even know how to keep myself safe. So often what's really traumatic for people, and remember, it's never the event, the trauma.
Yeah.
It's the things it causes you to think, believe, and embody. And it's the lens through which it changes the way that you see yourself, the world, and others. So in that moment, you have this 5-year-old who doesn't know how to be a guardian. She's a child herself, but it's the role she's put in. Mm-hmm. Right? That can be very traumatic because it causes you to, as an adult, feel like you have to know everything all the time.
Oh my gosh.
That can be one of those after effects, because you were put into a position as a young child where you were at a level of responsibility where it was your job to know what to do, even though you didn't know what to do.
Yes.
Right? So we have trauma number one. I don't even know about anything before that, but let's just call that. Now you're sharing this experience of crossing the border and that separation from your mother. Again, deep fear, I'm assuming, correct?
Yes, 100%. You see your mother leaving and you question, you can't comprehend in that moment what is going on.
And had she shared with you, do you remember, had she shared with you prior to crossing what to expect?
No, my mother, there was a lot of even her own parents had not modeled like healthy communication. So when we were going, it was just this form of survival of let's go, let's do this thing. There was never really, here's the reason why.
Okay. So when you mentioned, when you were sharing your story, that you finally reconnected with your mother, one of the questions I had in my head was this immediate or was this over a period of time?
I think this was an immediate decision. Okay. And it's something that I've noticed in my own personal journey of those moments of just taking that radical or drastic decision versus carefully thinking it all out.
Mm-hmm. And when you guys crossed, were you reconnected with your mom right away?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're reconnected with your mom right away. She knows she's going to family?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. She was going to my aunt and my uncle.
Okay. So you end up in Indiana.
Yes.
I'm sure there's not a lot of brown girls where you are.
No, at that time, no. And even now, it's not a very diverse state.
Right. And so we're confused. We're scared. We feel very, very different.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And how long did your mom stay with you?
She stayed for about a year and a half before they decided to move back to Mexico.
And were you involved in the decision of you staying, or were you told that that's what was going to happen?
It was told. I think that's a lot within the Mexican community or the Mexican community in general. There's very little say in your personal opinion. You're being told this.
So what was your relationship like with your great aunt and your great uncle?
It was a very difficult situation. My aunt, she wasn't a very loving person, and she had a lot of her own, personal journeying that she went through not being able to have children. So they took me in and they cared for me and loved me in their ways, but I can't say that it was in a very loving way. And I shared this with you, and I think that it is really important for me to share this as well, because I want people to understand the level of journeying that I have had to endure. When I was living with my aunt and uncle, my uncle actually sexually abused me. And that was probably one of the biggest marks that I had to endure when I was a young child.
Let's just sit with that for a second. You guys, when I talk about trauma, you can see here in her story, she's had a lot of really adverse, challenging experiences above and beyond this abuse, right? That as a young child, you have no choice but to endure. And then she's here in this experience where, again, she has no choice. And she's now placed in the care of people who are supposed to be nurturing her and raising her. And she's now in an abusive situation with no place to go. And do you think your aunt was aware of what was happening?
I, as an adult now, I'm sure she was aware. You know, when a young child goes through drastic moments in their lives, such as sexual abuse, I feel like there's always clues. I was very, very smart, always the first to raise a hand. I remember one time my teacher even said, like, give others the opportunity. That's how hungry I was for school. And I remember from the sexual abuse, there were a lot of clues. Myself, if I was a mother, I would question what is going on, like not wanting to take a shower, or very sporadic, or very emotionally shy. I became very shy. So there were a lot of clues. I don't know if because of the level of their love or attention or care, they couldn't pick up on those clues, because I do believe that that can be the case for some adults. And I also believe that she probably just chose to overlook. Mm-hmm. So I remember when my uncle passed away, because this was an experience. I came back to the US and, I re-met with him, and I had done a lot of spiritual work to the point where I could now be in the same room and love and forgive. I remember I was sitting next to his deathbed, and I remember saying to him, "I forgive you." And in that moment, he looked at me, and my aunt was sitting across from us. And I just could feel this profound moment of all three of us sharing our personal experiences without anyone even saying anything. So as an adult, I believe she knew.
Because she didn't ask you what you were forgiving him for.
No.
That's really powerful.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. Okay, this is a lot, guys. I know this is because I can feel it. It's a big story here. And it's not a unique one, unfortunately. And this is why we share it. So other people can say, oh my gosh, I had something similar, and they can start to feel understood.
Yeah.
So this is happening. Now, what prompts the decision for you to go then back to Mexico?
So I had to go back to Mexico because my mother saw the differences between my brothers and I. My uncle, my aunt wanted to actually adopt me, and my mom became very fearful around that decision. She believed that me being so separated from my brothers and my sister would really remove me from the family. That was one decision. And then also I had to go back to Mexico to fill out like my residency and get the process of the legal status all situated. So I went back to Mexico. I did my high school, beginning of college years there. And then once all the legal process was in place, like I said, I always lived in Mexico, but then I always lived in the US. So I was like, I have to go back home. And that's when I made the decision. I was already 21 to come back to the US.
And so what was it like? And I know you shared a little bit at the beginning of your story. What was it like leaving the home you were being raised in the US? And what was it like going back? How old were you? About 14?
Mm-hmm. I was actually 14, yeah.
Going back and seeing the differences in the environments and the state of living.
Oh my gosh. I mean, when I talk about poverty, it was poverty. Like, it was struggling to stay afloat. So many different layers to it. And it was very, very difficult for me to understand why that was happening. And then two, I felt like my life was being taken away from me. You know, in those years, even though I was like the outcast, I became very good friends with like the cheerleaders, and I was getting in the club, being a part of the table. So I remember, having the decision made by my uncle that I would go to this really amazing high school, and I was going to be part of the cheerleading club. So I felt like that identity, that thing that I was finally in, finally accepted, finally a part of the group, was being taken away from me. So I remember feeling so resentful, so angry. And it was this form of like, I was just ready to like tear things apart. I remember going to Mexico and I was so angry, and I took out that anger on my sister. She was young child. And I remember taking out all that anger on my sister. And my sister and I had very, very difficult years. She was very resentful with me as well. She was the only child, the girl, the loved one. She had that relationship with my mother. And then all of a sudden, this other child, another girl comes into the equation. So we had a very, very difficult upbringing. Now we have really, really healed those parts. My sister is my best friend. We have had some very difficult conversations. She has shared her heart, which was not easy to hear. I asked for forgiveness, and it has been a really beautiful relationship now of sisterhood and best friends. But there was a lot of resentment and a lot of anger there.
It's an amazing story. I mean, I could literally spend the whole hour just talking about this. I have so many questions with regards to this, because what's part of what's in my head is, you know, you shared with us the situation in the US, like, albeit like you were socially becoming very acclimated at home, things were not great, but you would have chosen that perhaps at the time over going back to Mexico. And did you know, had you visited Mexico throughout that time, did you know what it was that you were moving back into?
No, like I mentioned, my status was illegal. So like for the full time being in the US, I was here, and I had very little, I mean, I could remember very little on what our living situation was. So going back to Mexico, it was a rude awakening. It was a very rude awakening of, you know, even walking to school, a big difference. I never walked to school in the US. Food, it was very limited. There were a lot of things that my brothers and I had to do to support our own mother to try to stay afloat. And, you know, speaking about that makes me so emotional, because that is why I feel like I'm so connected with my two brothers, because we were living it together. And being, you know, they were 12, 9 at the time, having to walk miles and miles to try to go to the little market and sell our used clothes to make some money to try to help and, you know, be of support. It makes me, and I think this is an aha moment of that realization that I'm having right now, why I love my brothers so much, because they played their part and they always were so willing to support my mom. And that makes me so emotional. But yeah, it was a difficult time.
Well, and it was also a very shared experience. You know, here's the thing that's not lost on me. When your family went back to Mexico, this is just that in and of itself could have been its own one and only trauma that would have been life altering. Like each one of these things was a life altering piece of your journey. Growing up in poverty, then crossing the border, then being raised in a home without your family. Each one of those things could have been its own significant enough experience that could have changed the lens through which you saw your life. And you're in an abusive situation, then you're going back to Mexico. I mean, each one of these things is intense, but while you were living in the US, what's not lost on me is that there was no understanding within your sibling group of what each one of you was experiencing. They could not comprehend what it was like for you to be living without your family of origin. Forget the fact that you were in this traumatic experience while you were living there. And then you could not comprehend at the time what it was that they were living day to day. So part of it is that you guys, and this is what I mentioned at the beginning, you were now having this communal struggle. You were struggling separately, but this emotion that I feel coming through for you in part is this idea of, I now had someone, a camaraderie of struggle that I could now understand it and they could understand me at that level. And I feel like some of our deepest connections are the ones that are done in struggle, because that's when we learn how to rely on other people and trust.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And I really love this conversation because I've always felt these deep connections with my brothers and my sister, although we lived separate for a very large portion of our life and we didn't have those relationships. So when you say that, I understand the deep connection that we have.
So moving forward, you had mentioned in your intro that some of the ways that this had a long-lasting impact was within your own relationships. So what were you seeing? And I want you to just share what it was that you now know you were doing that you probably didn't consciously know at the time. And then I want to pause there so I can try to explain to people why that kind of thing happens, right? Yeah. So what did you find was happening that you didn't realize consciously was kind of this after effect of all of these experiences?
I think one of the deepest, or the one that I'm most aware of, is this save me identity that I developed within all of my partnerships. Every relationship that I entered, there was this energy that was coming from me very unconsciously of save me. There has been so much struggle, so much survival, so much challenge, so much trauma, very little love, very little care, very little support. Please give that to me. I was looking and seeking for it so much outside of me that when I received that affection and that love, and when I was being seen by my partners, I just gave it my all. I went in and I was there and I was loyal, so much so to the point where when there was the physical and emotional abuse, I stayed, and I stayed no matter what, because there was a form or some essence of love and care. So that was probably one of the biggest patterns that I carried. Another pattern that I carried was I was modeling the steps of my mother, her patterns, her cycles, how she navigated life. I navigated it in that way as well, where that moment where she left me, although she wasn't leaving me, but I took it as she was leaving me, I was also leaving as easily partnerships and friendships and jobs. There was no solid foundation or stability. And I carried those patterns in my relationships, whether they were intimate or friendships.
So thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, I really want to help people pull this apart, because I'm sure there are people that are listening that are like, wow, I have that real keen ability to just get up and walk. Right. And let's just talk about that for a second. Like when I work with people at the subconscious level, when I do hypnosis or I do rapid transformational therapy journeys with people, and say that's something that they know that they do, let's just call it, we easily disconnect, right? Mm-hmm. They want to understand why, because they don't want to do that anymore. They know it's not really beneficial to life. And in this particular case, without taking you on an RTT journey or doing hypnosis, it wouldn't be lost on me if in that experience you would share to me, I'll abandon first before I'm abandoned again.
Oh, 100%, yes.
My bag is always ready to go. Yes. Because I didn't have agency in all these very painful decisions in my life. So I will absolutely take agency, and I will leave before I feel like I'm going to be hurt, or I'm going to be disappointed, or I'm going to be rejected, or I'm going to be abandoned. And as you said, in retrospect and hindsight, your mother was leaving, her intention was not to abandon. Her intention was not to reject. She thought for sure she was doing something better for you. And honestly, probably better for the family as a whole, because it was going to be one less person she was going to need to have to provide for. It sounded like providing was very challenging where she was. And so I'm sure there were a lot of reasons that she could rationalize were the right decisions. Sometimes when I'm working with clients who are abandoned in the same way, it's cultural also. I've seen this in many cultures where it's almost like it takes a village approach to raise a family. And sometimes that village is in separate countries or across the country. And if that's the way a parent was raised, they might also not think it's so strange to let somebody else raise their child. I see this all the time, right? Yes. Especially in situations of poverty when, perhaps I don't know what your mother's situation was, but she may have witnessed that it wouldn't have been uncommon to ask another family member to step in because you just can't do for everyone. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yes. Everyone takes care of everyone. And that's, in my personal opinion, it gets very, very tricky. So there's no eyes on the children. There's no ears on the children. So I feel like this cultural way of everyone can take care of my child does really open up a lot of that sexual abuse for a lot of children.
And even if there wasn't sexual abuse, and I think you're right, I think it does, it exposes this ability to exploit, right? Yeah. But even if that wasn't the case, what I love when Gabor Mate says, sometimes trauma isn't what happened, sometimes it's what didn't happen. It's the needs that weren't met. It's the experiences that left us feeling scarce, or that we didn't have enough love, or that we didn't have enough affection, or we didn't have enough care. And that can be equally damaging to the psyche. And what I find so interesting, and I've been speaking about this a lot, is you might say to me, well, that was normal for my culture. It takes a village approach, or, we all raise each other's children, or the kids are just running around and grabbing a meal wherever they can, and this, that, and the other thing. What I've been trying to explain to people is that even though that might be the norm culturally, it is not normal for the human body and the human experience. And I love this book. I have it on my bookshelf here that Gabor Mate wrote, and it's called The Myth of Normal, right? Because I'll hear people say, well, that's just the way it was in my community, or that's just the way it was within our family, or that's just the way it was within our culture. But the human body is designed for a specific set of experiences, and its regulation system and its nervous system is designed for a certain set of experiences. And just because it's normal, it doesn't mean that it's natural and healthy for the human body. And this is why I think so many people are so stuck, because so many of these experiences can be very toxic to the soul and the system.
Yes. Yeah, that's something that I hear a lot within the, Hispanic Latino community. That's how it was. That's how it is. That's how it's going to be. There's that deep mentality of that's just how it is.
Right. So this is a great segue into what it looks like to be a cycle breaker, because it's usually the cycle breaker that says, well, that might be the way it is, but I want different. And it's really hard to be a cycle breaker. Anyone that's done it knows it is an ugly, ugly journey. It's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly painful. You usually get pushback from the family members that are not willing to break cycles. But what you can gain from going through that treacherous journey is a sense of freedom and liberation. You don't even know that that's how good it's going to be on the other side. because you get to be in your full, true, authentic self. So I know you went on this journey. Can you share with people what your cycle breaking journey looked like and how you took the road back to self, essentially?
Yeah. I remember vividly, it was 6 years ago, and I was in this relationship where I was so deeply in love, and this person, the usual cheating and all this stuff. And we had gone through this, we had gone to this music festival, and it was my very first time taking psychedelics. And from my culture and background in Catholicism, it was very like anti-no, like, how dare you, very judgmental. So I went to this event and I made the decision to take psychedelics. And that was literally the turning point for me. My consciousness opened up so much that it was like, from one day to another, I, went vegan, and I got very much into meditation. And I realized that this relationship was very unhealthy and very toxic. We ended up, breaking the relationship. And I went on this journey of a lot of psychedelics. I used to do, acid by myself for 8-9 hours at a time, and just really going in deep. And at that time, it was really just pulling back the layers of releasing. And there was so much crying and so much presence with what had happened in my journey. And I just wanted to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And from those experiences, there was this deep desire of personal, development and spiritual journeying. And I wanted and still want to get to the point where I feel my freest self, my truest self. And it's daily. My work is daily. My practices are daily. Fast forward 6 years later, now being here, it is truly a gift, and a gift to be on this spiritual journey, and a gift to have been given the journey of challenge and trauma and all of that. Because without all of that, I wouldn't be as hungry as I am spiritually and personally and emotionally. And I feel like that hunger just develops more and more and more.
I couldn't agree more. I have a couple of questions for you. But when I say to people, there's a gift in every challenge and there is purpose in the pain, this is what I'm talking about. And trust me when I say this to somebody when they're in it, I'm not stupid. Like, you don't realize these gifts till A, much later down the road, and B, after doing hard work, right? You don't just realize them one day. You have to really kind of hit rock bottom in order to want to rise and gain the gifts that aren't in the challenge. What I want to touch on a little bit is the psychedelic journey, because as a trauma coach, this is a very, very big topic in our industry. I just came back from a trauma conference in May that was hosted by Bessel van der Kolk, who's the author of The Body Keeps the Score, and he's the head of the Trauma Research Foundation out of Boston. And there was a lot of talk in these conferences about the use of psilocybin, about the use of LSD, about the use of ayahuasca, and why, right? What it does for the conscious mind. It reminds me a little bit about what I do and when I do hypnosis. It really just allows the conscious mind to take a breather. And really what I always say is go from the driver's seat to the trunk of the car and allow these experiences to be seen through a different lens so they can be addressed. So what different kinds of modalities, what type of different psychedelics, plant-based medicine did you utilize on your journey?
I did various different. I did psilocybin, I did acid, I did ayahuasca, I did MDMA. There were just very different, sometimes, a mixture. of one, and the other, I did it for probably 3 years. Mm-hmm. I think it was like 3 years of this like journeying through the psychedelics, and each medicine carries so much profound wisdom. I did them. I was actually very, very fortunate to have people around me who were educated.
Well, that was going to be my question. You know, that's the important piece for people to understand. Like, I'm not telling people to go out and grab a tab of acid and just drop it and just go along for the ride. I had a guest on a very long time ago, 2 years ago, that was doing, you know, kind of, she was doing psilocybin, but not in in an environment that was kind of therapeutic or guided. And she said it was like a horrific journey. And then when she did it with more expertise and with some guidance and with some mentorship, she was able to reap the benefits in a much more productive way. So can you explain, because it's important for people to know when we talk about utilizing plant-based medicine and we're using things like ketamine and ayahuasca and LSD, it is important for it to be with people or with a person that understands the power, how to microdose, how to utilize this stuff. So how did you find this kind of support network, and in what kind of environment did you find it?
Yeah, I remember, I think it was Ram Dass who said there are two key ingredients to using psychedelics, and one is set and the other is setting, your mindset, and then the setting, the environment that you are around. And I was very, very fortunate to be introduced to a group of people who had been doing psychedelics for many years, and they themselves were supporting others through sacred ceremonies. They introduced me to certain shamans, and I went to certain places in Ecuador in the jungle. So I was always very well supported and very well held in those spaces. And I have heard of many people who don't do it in the correct mindset or in the correct setting and have very difficult experiences. So with these types of, tools, I always say there's so much devotion and so much sacredness there. If we treat it as the sacred tool that it is, we will experience the beautiful, beautiful benefits from it. So they helped me open up my consciousness, my heart, my way of thinking, my way of moving through life in such a profound way. In the past 2 years, I have actually stopped because I wanted to reach that level of presence and connection that came from the psychedelics through meditation and just through healthy living. So yes, I will incorporate them once again. And I have actually taken my friends through a psilocybin journey, but there was always so much care. There was always so much curation that happened in these experiences, because you really do have to help those people that can support you in that way.
Perfect. I couldn't agree more. And I'm like, as a trauma coach, I research everything. I have a lot of clients who have come to me who maybe have done a psilocybin journey, or if they've done ayahuasca before, or while they're working with me, they're engaging in these kinds of settings that you're talking about to further explore, right? I think it takes a village. I think all approaches are viable. But it's so important because it does get so much traction these days that if you're going to go a plant-based medicine route or end up on the psychedelic journey, it's just really important. I think you said it perfectly, to really make sure you have the right set and the right setting, right? Yes. The right mindset. And really that setting is a deep, supportive environment that knows what they're doing.
Yes.
So you've done all this work. You did the deep work. And tell us where you are now. Tell us how this took you into the career where you are today to help serve and support others.
Yeah, through those experiences with psychedelics, I was able to enter this world of yoga, meditation. I got very, very intrigued about crystals and the metaphysical aspects. I ended up opening a jewelry line, very, very successful. And it was really about the metaphysical aspects of the stones. Then that led me to Reiki healing, quantum healing, energy work, and it always deepens, right? There's always this desire for greater impact, greater support. And I, at the time, had a business coach helping me with my jewelry line. And I told her about my desire to one day support women through the journey that I had endured. And she said, well, what's your goal? And I said, 5 years from now. And she goes, well, why not do it now? And from 1 month to another, we had set everything up. And the importance of coaching, people, coaches, mentors can really collapse the timing for you. It's all about the beliefs and the blocks that we put on ourselves. So that took me to coaching, which is what I do now. It first started with self-love coaching, and then that evolved into what I currently do, which is support women within their businesses to become women who are independent with their finances, who are growing a business from the heart and are truly, truly supporting others on their journey as well.
I love it. 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 I love how you have taken every experience you've had and turned it into something so serving and so meaningful and so purposeful. And I know from firsthand experience, when you finally find yourself in the role that you're really destined to be in, it never feels like work.
Never.
It feels like a complete gift and blessing, right?
Yes, I was telling this story the other day. I was like, going back to a 9 to 5 feels like hell for me.
Oh yeah, I would never do it. But what's so interesting is even my own parents will say to me, you could never do what you're doing today had you not gone through what you went through. And every experience you've had up to this point has prepared you to do what it is that you're doing today. Yes. And I know I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. Yes. And I know that you're exactly where you're supposed to be too. So I hope that gives a little bit of hope to people who are listening who maybe had a similar experience to Amparo and can resonate with her story and realize that the story is the story you choose. You can have a lot of chapters that you don't write yourself. There's no question about that. But you do get to choose how it ends, and you do get to choose how to narrate it once you have the agency and you're ready to take control of that story. So I want people to get a sense of how they could reach out to you. I know that you're pretty active on Instagram, and people can find you simply by typing in your name, which is Amparo Rojas. And we'll have that right in the show notes for people. And you have access to all the things I'm about to discuss right off the link tree in your bio on your Instagram handle. So you offer a free women's collective. It's a monthly group. It's 2 hours online, which sounds amazing. I think I might join it myself. And you also offer a 30-minute discovery call that to anyone that would be interested in learning more about how you could support them. Is that correct?
Yes, 100%.
And can you just share in a minute or two what the Free Women's Collective is?
Yeah, so the Free Women's Collective all came because I wanted deeper connections with women. I went on this, journey of healing that feminine wounding. And when I truly healed that, I was like, okay, I'm ready for sisterhood. And like, not just can you come and empower me, but how can we empower together? So the Women's Collective stemmed from that, of bringing women together who are desiring deeper connection, soul community, who want to be in a space where they feel connected, inspired, where they're healing and having a lot of fucking fun. Like, that's a big essence. Like, yes, spirituality is great and all amazingness, but can we have fun doing it? So we bring in sister guests, or guest sisters, what I call them, and we expose their work in a way where it doesn't feel networky or salesy, but this is what I have for you. This is how I can serve you. There's 3 guest sisters who support us during the 2 hours, and it's just very enriching and very fulfilling. And it also has that networking essence where here's her work, an astrologer. If you've been seeking, you know her work now, go follow her, go connect, go collaborate. Let's spread this. So that's where that women's collective all birthed from.
Well, it's a perfect segue, because if you feel connected to Amparo, this is, this is not a networking podcast, but it really is part of what I do here, is really exposing people to other people's stories, but also how you've built a business around it and how people could benefit from that and engage with you. And if someone has listened today and they really feel very connected to you, I highly encourage people to reach out to you, check out your Instagram. Again, it's your name, Amparo Rojas, and check out this women's collective. Contact her for a free discovery call. I can tell you, I don't think you'll be disappointed. It was just such a pleasure having you here today, and to hear your story. I really could feel the intensity of your journey. And I'm just so grateful that you're here to share it with us today.
Thank you so much. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the call, it seems so far away, that story, and sometimes I don't tell it as much as I should. But just sharing that story and all the pieces that made that story, and to be here sitting who I am, like the first financially independent woman of my entire family, and to be supporting and guiding my sister and my cousins and inspiration, like it was just a really, really beautiful time and an honor to share my story. So I hope that this story really gets to the hearts of the women who are in that space, maybe questioning, how am I going to do it? I'm here. I'm proof that it can be done.
This is the breaking of generational trauma, guys. So awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. If you guys enjoyed this episode, I highly encourage you to check out all the episodes of my podcast. You can simply look for Flip That Shit wherever you find your podcasts. Subscribe so you'll be notified when new podcasts are dropped. We drop them every week. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed having you today.
Thank you, Stacey.